Well, the time is just gone 8:53 a.m. as we head towards the news this morning, and it's the time of the week. We bring you eThekwini Secure, the chairperson, Imtiaz Syed. Imtiaz, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yes, Imtiaz, the big talking point in South Africa looking ahead at next week, the EFF call for the national shutdown. And I'm sure, people like yourselves, eThekwini Secure, addressing these issues because it is clear. We've seen the call that was made by Julius Malema. We've seen his speech. He also spoke about Indian businessmen and, small businesses and why they should be supporting. But clearly there are concerns because we know with strikes, the nature of strikes in this country, things can get out of hand.
Absolutely. Inayat, I think what we firstly need to address is that this is a national shutdown called for by the leader of the EFF, right? It's not a national unrest. And I think based on history, what we're coming from in terms of the unrest and all of that, people have fear, a lot of fear in them in terms of what's going on and what's going to happen and what might happen and what could happen. Now, when we speak to this, we really need to address it in the platform by which it exists. The EFF is calling for a national shutdown. Those that support the EFF have a right to shut down and act according to their leadership. But it doesn't mean that all of South Africa needs to have a shutdown. The EFF is calling for it. It's not a compulsory thing where you have to be shut down and do all of those things. Now, also, with that being said, we need to understand that the mandate of law enforcement is to ensure that your democratic right is protected as well, and you need to be able to act and do as you please freely as well, as long as it's within the ambits of the law. So that's basically what it is, and we shouldn't be pushing this agenda of an unrest, because the more we speak about it, the more it seems to become a false reality in our perspective. And then we start planning and preparing around an unrest. Correctly so. I mean, we've used this as a major tool in terms of mobilizing the community and acting towards their fears, because they need to be spoken to their fears. And ultimately, there is risk of these things happening. And the more we mobilize, the more we have actions in place and plans in place, the more prepared we are in order to mitigate our risk.
Yes. Now, Imtiaz, I know last night you were at a meeting, and I'm sure that there are still going to be many more meetings. And just, give us an overview, what is coming out of these meetings and what should people do? What shouldn't they do?
So what has transpired, we've had very short meetings. I think my speeches are less than 5 minutes in all of these meetings. It's basically to give people an idea and an understanding of what we are doing, what we have done in terms of the CPF. And then obviously SAPS, our partners in Metro Police as well, are always in the room, and they speak to what plans they have in terms of contingencies. And then we speak to, firstly, the community by far and large in terms of mobilization and a state of readiness and preparedness in terms of in case there is something that goes out of control and opportunistic movements start happening within the ambits of the shutdown. So with that being said, we've had a meeting on Monday. We obviously had Community in Blue members registered for a while now. We've expedited the process by which they were issued with their safety vests and their cards. And many people ask me, would it not be putting a target on your back by putting out community members in safety vests and with cards and all of those things? The importance of it was, firstly, for them to fully understand the code of conduct. The code of conduct speaks to being non-racist, non-sexist, non-violent, being vigilant, no vigilantism, those kinds of things. And that's just the synopsis of it. But it also speaks to mobilizing communities where there's a recognition towards an organized community. Now, when you're organized and you're speaking the same language and you are doing the same thing at the same time, we tend to have a strength in that. And that was the important thing about mobilizing the community. So with that being said, just in the Overport area, we have something like 100 Community in Blue patrollers that are ready to go out and patrol their streets. Obviously, we've started VCPs and operations as of Monday last week in terms of just being around, being visible, and organizing ourselves. Then on Wednesday, which was last night, We called in all the business owners of Ward 31. There were many that were not there, but those were there that were there. I think the room was full. And we basically gave them an understanding of where we are in a state of readiness. We also had security companies that were in the midst of the businesses, because they also act in the capacity of businesses within our area. And we then ironed out a few issues on the side of SAPS, on the side of community, and how do we respond? What is your main cause of action in terms of something happening to your business, and how do we move forward? So what we've done is we've devised a very strategic plan for the community in blue members. All of them are on a WhatsApp group in terms of mobilization linked to SAPS. So SAPS would then speak to that grouping of individuals that are ready to assist SAPS in terms of force multiplication, to go out and be at certain checkpoints or hotspots during the day on the 20th, or even from the night before. And that's our plenary in terms of Sunday and going into Monday. Thereafter, we're looking at the businesses who are a formation on their own, and they have their own grouping, their own Zello channel, to speak to us in terms of what it is that they need and if they are at risk at all. And then we can communicate that very quickly to get response out there to them. But the most important thing was being organized and clearing and clarifying a clear strategy of how we plan to operate during this time.
Yes, but also I think what is important is, what we are saying is organizations like yourselves. Earlier on, I spoke to the DA, and they obviously are trying to get an interdict as well. But a lot of this is actually aimed, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with what Julius Malema is saying with regard to the reasons as to why they're calling for the shutdown, because these are real issues, these are real problems. ESCOM is a real issue, the provision of water is a real issue, joblessness, these are real issues. But the
Yes.
concern is the violence that could possibly, or the unrest that could accompany these protests, but also at the same time looking at organizations like yourself, being proactive, taking the matter up, and making sure that there are some plans in place to try and obviously ensure the safety, the security of people, businesses, all of that. Last night you spoke to the business community, but coming from the government, should the government not be taking the lead as well, Imtiaz?
Absolutely. I think we're lacking in that part in terms of government actually taking the lead or even making a comment around the issue of the shutdown. I think when we're speaking to the issue of government, there needs to be some firm communication to communities to allay their fears. And that's not forthcoming. And that is a great cause for concern, because it leaves many, many members of the community, in a state of real utter shock and hesitance in terms of how do they move forward and what is going to happen after Tuesday. And that uncertainty really is a major cause for concern. So in terms of that, we're saying the EFF has a right to do what they're doing, and correctly so. I mean, they have a right to call for the president to step down. They have a right to speak on the issues of ESCOM and service delivery and all of these things. But I'm saying they have been in government for quite a while, right? And why is it that opportunistically they call for a national shutdown in terms of addressing these issues? When we look at them in parliament, there is no discussions around these issues, but here we find them taking to the streets to complain about these issues, when in fact they sit in positions of power in order to do these things. Now, this is very concerning. Why? Because you're now mobilizing communities by far and large that are impoverished. And we're coming out from the unrest, which is, we haven't even recovered from that as yet. But there is incitement towards it to say that there is a risk of it. And that is concerning to all role players. And I think this time around, there is a state of readiness in terms of SAPS. Obviously, all of those plans can't be divulged, on media platforms. But I'm saying there is a state of readiness. We have been meeting in meetings quite often with SAPS and law enforcement agencies to see how we can mitigate this risk. So with that being said, Inayat, I think it's very important for all community members to be mobilized. And for us, I'll be very honest with you, as eThekwini Secure and the CPF structures, we have taken this opportunity to play on the fears of people, to mobilize them. Because ultimately, when we do make call outs for community members to come out in terms of everyday crime, you find that the numbers are very, very limited. But when things like this arise, we see that many members of the community, through their fear, start to stand up. And we then now take opportunity to say that this needs to continue past the 20th. So we've used it as an opportunity to mobilize. We're using it to speak to the inners of our communities to say that we need to always be mobilized because of the situation in our country at the moment.
Well, just let's watch the space. Let's see what develops on
Inshallah.
the 20th. But for now, we thank you as always for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Imtiaz Syed, Chairperson of eThekwini, secure this morning ahead of the national shutdown on the 20th of March. 9:03 a.m. We're heading for the news. Jed was standing by.